Good morning, Boulevard family. Hey, I have a friend. This friend claims to have a song title or a line from a song for almost every situation or conversation that you can have in life. And after, long friendship with him, I would guess that he is possibly right. I'm always amazed at what we can be encountering or what conversation we can be having, and he can pop into some kind of a song or begin singing or humming or whatever. It's just there. Isn't it amazing how powerful music can be in our life? Now, let me ask you, how many of you remember what song was playing when you had your first kiss? I didn't think you could be worse than first service. But raise your hand if you remember the song that was playing when you had your first kiss. Okay, that's 3 more than first service, okay? All right. How many of you, I really think we might need to go back to Family Month. We got a problem here. So how many of you remember a song, how many of you have a song that almost every time you hear it, you want to cry? It actually kind of makes you cry. All right, you got that song? Yeah, I think most of us do. You know, it was a couple of weeks ago when they were talking about the transition that's going to be happening in our church. I'm not sure exactly how it happened, but the worship team put together an a cappella version of Great Is Thy Faithfulness. And I don't believe that they knew that has been my favorite song, hymn, any song for most of my life, even dating back when I was a kid, and just has some special meaning to me. And so it really was a great reminder from the Lord. Again, music is just powerful. If you haven't been with us for a while, or you're watching live stream today, then you would know, or you might not know, that we've been talking about the life of a man by the name of David for, it's going to be about an 8-week series altogether. We're kind of coming down towards the end of it. 8 weeks is a lot of time to spend on someone's life, although we could spend more. And we have chosen him for a number of reasons, because his life reflects one of the core values here at Boulevard Christian Church. And that is that we develop a life that seeks intimacy with God. The vulnerability, the honesty, the conversation, the openness, all those things. This man's life reflects that type of intimacy that we want to develop in our church. He is a great example of that. We have watched him from the sheep pens as just a shepherd over the sheep, and being called from that, anointed to someday be the king of Israel. We have seen him slay the giant. A couple weeks ago, James talked about the friendships that he had. That this is a man who not only knew what it took to have a relationship with God, but also what it took to have relationships with those around. And he had a great friendship with his friend Jonathan. And last week we were reminded that he was not perfect, and he had crutches in his life, and God, through a series of events, began to take those crutches from him in the same way that he does us sometimes, so that we can trust him fully. So today we're talking about David in yet another situation. We're going to be looking at David in what I would call an opportunity for life's most subtle temptation. And it all starts with a song. Now, James talked about this a little bit last week, but I think there's some other things, some other lessons maybe that can be squeezed from this. And so when we look at 1 Samuel 18, what we find is this. We find that David has slayed Goliath, and that now he has had some other victories. He has been made commander of Saul's army, Israel. And so now they are returning to, I'm assuming, Jerusalem. And as they return, the women are coming out from some of the local villages stuff along the road, and they are playing tambourines, and they're playing their cymbals, and they're dancing, and they're singing this song. We're not told the whole song. We're only told 2 lines of the song. Music is powerful. The first line goes like this. Saul has killed his thousands. Now, you have to use your imagination with me a little bit, but I just kind of think after this particular line, Saul has killed his thousands, that I can hear this ripping like an 8-bar guitar solo. And in my imagination, what I see is, I see Saul just giving enough chance. Saul has killed his thousands. And it's ripping. And he kind of gives him enough time to stick out his chest and kind of do the Saul strut for a little bit. That's me, girls. Bring it on. Sing a little louder. No, really. Sing a little louder. And he just kind of strutting. And then comes the second line. And David, his 10,000s. That's right. And in just 2 lines, I think strutting Saul goes to sulking Saul. It doesn't take much. It didn't take long. But all of a sudden, Samuel tells us that that Saul became very angry. And a telling phrase from that time on, that he turned a jealous eye, or that he kept a jealous eye on David. Things go downhill really, really quick. Again, James really unfolded this passage last week beautifully for us and had some powerful lessons. But I think there's some other things that we can get from this particular passage. So I want to just re-walk it quickly. The next day even, the very next day, David is playing some music for Saul to soothe and comfort him. And it says that Saul picked up a spear and tried to pin David to the wall. David escapes. Maybe David's just thinking, maybe he's just got target practice and he's a bad spear thrower. But it happens again. And then Saul gets this idea that if I can get David to marry one of my daughters, maybe she can get rid of him. And so he tries to get one of his daughters to marry David. And David has kind of this aw shucks moment of like, who, me? I'm just a country kid. I shouldn't be marrying a king's daughter. So that doesn't work. Doesn't keep Saul from trying again. He gives his next daughter in marriage to David. And again, not so that he can be David's father-in-law, okay? It's not any motive that pure. Instead, it's so basically somehow they can get rid of David. And then he dials it up. He goes from himself just trying to do David away to actually telling Jonathan, this is his son. He goes to some of the other men around him and basically does a kind of an assassination plot on David's life. And it involves more spears. It involves even an idol and goat's hair. And you'll have to read the story. There's more anger. There's more men involved. And what has started with chaos now turns into just this incredible chase. And Saul begins to chase David, and David takes off. And David runs to his spiritual mentor, Samuel. And then he runs to his friend, Jonathan. And Jonathan says, hey, I don't think Dad's trying to kill you. He runs to the priest, Ahimelech, who gives him the sword of Goliath. And over the river and through the woods. But he's not going to Grandma's house. He's heading to the wilderness. And he ends up first in this place called the Cave of Adullam. And Samuel has this interesting little thing about this Cave of Adullam that he shares with us is that he gathers an army. Well, that sounds good. Saul's chasing you. You probably need to have an army. An army of 400 men. And Samuel throws in there that this is an army of 400 men of basically men who are in trouble. He calls them discontents and troublemakers and in debt. Quite an army. And I believe that David is in this cave of Adullam, in this wilderness. And probably like you and I have been at some point in time in our life, he is surrounded with people, but that he is very alone. Ever been there before? Surrounded by people, but feeling very alone? Some of the things that David writes during this time leads me to believe that he felt very alone. And Samuel gives 6 chapters, folks. Samuel gives 6 chapters to this chaos that keeps moving into this chase. 6 chapters, that's this situation that starts with 2 simple lines from a song. And you have to ask yourself, why? Why 6 chapters? I mean, there's a lot of bigger events that happen in the Bible that maybe only a sentence or 2 or maybe a paragraph are given to. 6 chapters of this chase. 6 chapters of offenses from Saul to David. 6 chapters of threats. 6 chapters of hurt. From David's perspective, hurt and chapters of betrayal and fear. And the kind of sleeplessness that happens only when you know or you're not sure that if you will wake up in the morning because this person is chasing you and really wants to take your life. 6 chapters of betrayal and aloneness from a trusted friend, a friend that you have only helped. And I believe, friends, I think that we have to read these chapters very slowly to capture and gain the weight of the offenses from Saul and what that weight and burden would have done in David's life as he ran from wilderness into wilderness and cave to cave. And I think we have to go through it slowly for us to fully understand the sweetness of the opportunity that is going to be coming to David in just a few days. He goes from the cave of Adullam and he ends up in the wilderness of En-Gedi. And in the wilderness of En-Gedi, there's just a place, and it's called En-Gedi. And En-Gedi is this oasis out in the middle of this desert wilderness. And it's beautiful, and it's just these blue spring-fed pools, and the shepherds would bring their sheep there, and there were sheep pens there. Samuel even records that. And not only that, up in the cliffs at En-Gedi, there are all kinds of caves that made places for people to be protected from the wilderness weather and people who were chasing him. And David's opportunity, sweet opportunity, the most subtle temptation is going to come in this cave at En-Gedi. Samuel records that Saul is out there in the wilderness with 3,000 of them, 3,000 he classifies as elite troops. And they are going through the wilderness of En-Gedi, and they come up to this oasis, maybe suspecting that David is probably there in a cave. And they're so close, I mean, it's like they're so close and there's such urgency that you can probably almost smell them. You know, I mean that. Take 400 guys who've been out in the wilderness for a while and stick them in a cave, and you're probably going to smell them, right? But they know they're close, and they're riding, and you can hear the music of the soundtrack getting a little bit loud and more intense in the background. And Saul's on his donkey, and they're riding through, and all of a sudden he goes, and all his men stop. And the captain says, "Saul, what is it? Have you seen David?" And he says, "No, I have to go to the bathroom." Now all the men kind of laugh. Got to go to the bathroom. Well, just, find a cactus out there. And he goes, "No, number 2. Really, it's in the scripture. Look." And so Samuel's an interesting writer. Samuel gives us more opportunities for bathroom humor than probably any other biblical writer. Thought you just might want to know that. Let me just hit the pause button for a second. Dawn and I have raised 4 boys, and now we have 4 grandsons. And one of the things I have come to understand is bathroom humor for an 8-year-old never goes out of style. I mean, generationally, bathroom humor is just passed on from one generation to another. At some point in time, if you're like an 8-year-old stand-up comedian and nothing is working, just go to the bathroom humor. Gets them every time. So the other day, you're wondering, what tasteless illustration is he going to use now? Here it's coming. So the other day, I'm playing a game. I'm playing basketball with some of my grandsons, and we're playing a game of pig, okay? And if you don't know how to play pig, all right, the one person shoots, and if he makes the shot, the other person has to stand in the exact same spot and make the shot. And if he doesn't, he gets the first letter of whatever game you're playing, cow or dog or whatever, but we are playing pig. And so my grandson makes the shot, okay, all right, and I stand up and I shoot a basketball like a 30-06, and I miss the shot, okay, I miss the shot, and I just inadvertently say, all right, Pop's gotta pee. Pop's gotta pee. We're playing pig. They heard Pop's gotta pee, and I thought they were going to fall on their face on the hot asphalt laughing. They laughed their stinking minds off, okay? Just went on and on and on, all right? Bathroom humor. Never gets old. Back to Saul and David. So Saul gets off his donkey and he goes in the cave. And who do you think is in the cave? David and his men. That's exactly right. And Saul goes in to do what he has to do, all right? And some of you think that I'm going to say something like he was caught with his pants down, but I'm not going to say that, all right? So let's just go on. Let's cut to the chase. Here's what's happening. He goes in the cave, and David is in the cave with his men. And folks, listen. David is presented in that second with life's most subtle temptation, and that is vengeance. And vengeance is subtle for a couple of reasons. One of the reasons vengeance is subtle because vengeance feels right, doesn't it? I mean, it just feels right. It is natural. And it feels right because it actually can be just. It can be justice. There are 6 chapters of these offenses, real offenses, not just perceived offenses, real offenses, life-threatening offenses. And David has got this ledger full of these things in his head, and he's got a knife in his hand. And he has his ledger, and I would reckon this morning that you and I have our ledger full of offenses. People who have hurt us once or many times are hurting us presently. And we just with the flip of a page can recount those offenses one after another. And Samuel writes these 4 words. He says, so David crept forward. David crept forward. And I don't know if David crept 25 feet or if he crept 5 feet. We don't know that. It just says that he crept forward. And I'm wondering in that creeping forward, those 4 simple words, I'm wondering what was going on in David's mind. Was it those 6 chapters of offenses? Was it all the hurt? Was it all the loneliness? Was it all the sleepless nights? Was it all the fear that he had had in his life since Saul had been chasing him? Now, let me ask you to do something here, folks. Don't make David a superhero. Don't put a cape on him right here in the cave. David's flesh and blood. He's been on the run with his life in danger for months, if not longer, for years possibly. Don't put a cape on him. All those things would have been in his mind. And here was this perfect opportunity. And we don't know exactly what he was thinking, but at some point in time, maybe a little bit later on, Psalm 142, something that David wrote says this was an experience about the time that David was in the cave. And here's a couple of verses from it. When I am overwhelmed, you alone know the way I should turn. Wherever I go, my enemies have set traps for me. I look for someone to come and help me, but no one gives me a passing thought. No one will help me. No one cares a bit what happens to me. Maybe that gives us a lead into what David was thinking. And folks, it not only feels right because there's justice possibly involved, but it also feels right. This vengeance feels right because, seriously, everyone is clapping for you in the cave. Well, we're told in the passage that David's men, when they see what the opportunity, they're going, David, that's Saul. And he's vulnerable. Take the knife, plunge it into his back. Think about all the things that he has been doing to you, and you will be king. Clapping. They're clapping quietly, but they're clapping. Encouragement, pats on the back. Come on, you can do this thing. And then they turned it up a notch. They dialed it up a notch. They say, hey, not only do you have an opportunity, this is an opportunity that God has given you. Hey, you can't deny a God-given opportunity, can you? This is something that God has presented to you. You would be righteous in doing this. Be careful, folks. Be careful. Pay attention to the character of those who are around you and are clapping. Pay attention. It can sound good. It can be your encouragement to creep forward and take the knife and plunge the knife of vengeance. But David creeps forward. But he doesn't plunge the knife. Instead, he takes the knife and he cuts a corner off Saul's robe. We're not told if it was on Saul or not, but that's all he does. He cuts the corner off Saul's robe. But even, it says, even in the cutting off the corner, his conscience began to bother him. Pay close attention to this. This is important. Do you desire to be a person whose heart is like the heart of Jesus? Is that your desire? Then in order to do that, we must think like Jesus thinks. We must feed ourselves truth. The standard must be there. And we sometimes can say, you know what, I did it and I don't even feel bad about it. Let me remind you, folks, that our conscience is not the standard. Your conscience is not the standard of right and wrong, because over the years, you have and I have had a number of people look us in the eye and say, I did that and I didn't feel bad about it. And our thought was, you should have felt bad about it. It was wrong. See, the conscience is a muscle. It's a muscle, and it has to be trained. It has to be trained diligently. It has to be trained consistently. And it has to be trained with truth. And if it is not trained intentionally with righteousness and truth, then it will be trained in the same manner with the values of the world. And the values of the world will always be vengeance. They will always be saying, clapping for, encouraging, plunging in the knife of vengeance. So in order for us to be people after God's own heart, we have to be sensitive to the things that God's heart is sensitive to. So when the opportunity comes, as we creep forward, our conscience speaks truth to us, regardless of the clapping in the background. David doesn't plunge the knife because his conscience has been trained. Read his Psalms. Read his Psalms. His conscience has been trained with truth. And folks, sometimes our consciences can be trained with the last Instagram message. Sometimes our conscience could be trained by what's going on in a Facebook messaging. But David trusted God's plan. That's really bottom line. David trusted God's plan. He said to his men, the Lord forbid that I should do this to my Lord the king. I shouldn't attack the Lord's anointed one, for the Lord himself has chosen him. He trusts God's plan. God has anointed him. I'm not going to get in the way of that. And he doesn't question God's call. And this is really important, folks. Listen, when you are in the military and you are asked to salute an officer, who are you saluting? You're saluting the rank, right? And regardless of that person's character in that rank, you are still called to salute. And sometimes we get in the way of thinking, well, that they're in that position, but they're not a person worthy of my respect. And we have to remember that they've been placed there in that situation by God. Now, if they're asking us to do something against God's will, that's one thing. But that's not what this is about. David trusts God's plan. And in doing that, he even restrains his men. And there's some things that can be talked about there in his restraining them, because they want to kill Saul also. And he not only will not plunge the knife, he will also keep them from plunging the knife. And folks, sometimes we don't restrain those around us. Sometimes when there's vengeance on the line, when it's dangling in front of us, we actually restoke those around us. How do we do that? Because we've been hurt by someone, we've been offended by someone, and we tell a person to process that. And that can be natural, and that can be helpful even. But sometimes then we choose to tell another. And we choose to tell another those offenses against us. And we choose to tell others our hurts and our story over and over again. And we not only restoke that hurt in our own heart, we restoke that fire in the hearts of them, so we can gather an army of discontents and troublemakers who will clap for us in the cave so that we might take the most subtle temptation. Well, Saul leaves unscathed, and completely unaware of what is going on. And he walks out of the cave, and I can just imagine he goes down to his donkey, and just about the time he's supposed to get on his donkey, something unusual happens. David comes to the mouth of the cave, and he goes, "Yoo-hoo! Yoo-hoo!" And Saul looks up at the cave, and David has the corner of his robe. Now, Samuel does not record this, but something tells me that possibly Saul might be needing to look for another cave, if you know what I'm talking about. Had to be a scary moment. Life had to pass. Those 6 chapters had to pass before his eyes. And I want to read this to you because I think it's incredibly important. What David says to Saul from the mouth of this cave, because it probably shows the heart of David as well as anything. Then he shouted to Saul, "Why do you listen to the people who say I am trying to harm you? This very day you can see with your own eyes it isn't true. For the Lord placed you at my mercy back there in the cave. Some of my men told me to kill you, but I spared you. For I said, I will never harm the king. He is the Lord's anointed one. Look, my father, at what I have in my hand. It is a piece of the hem of your robe. I cut it off, but I didn't kill you. This proves that I am not trying to harm you and that I have not sinned against you, even though you have been hunting for me to kill me. May the Lord judge between us. Perhaps the Lord will punish you for what you were trying to do to me, but I will never harm you." Folks, listen, David trusts God's plan and he trusts God's place. He knows the reality is that this man has been trying to kill him. He's not living in a river of denial. He is full aware of the reality of Saul's threats. But he knows that though there may be vengeance, but it won't come at his hand. He trusts God's plan to anoint Saul, and he trusts God's place. And when we become the avenger, when we seek vengeance, when we retaliate, we get in the way of God's perfect plan of developing his character in us, and God's plan is always even for the offender to come back to him. When we get in the way of the avenger, we block his plan, and when we take God's place, we usurp his position of authority. We become God when we decide to retaliate. We become God when we decide to plunge the knife of vengeance, to take the subtle temptation. A friend of mine told me just recently, again, that years ago, prior to knowing Jesus, that someone owed him, I think he said, some weed and some vinyl records, and they didn't deliver. And so his answer to them was that he took several sticks of dynamite and blew their car up. And he said, he said, it took me years, even after I came to Christ, to realize that God is the avenger. God's vengeance is in his hands. And he said, I memorized this passage, training the conscience, Deuteronomy 32:35. God says, I will pay them back. Their feet will slip and their day of disaster will come. God. Folks, he is a God of justice. He is a God of justice. I love the beach. Sometimes when I stand at the beach, matter of fact, almost every time I stand at the beach, I'm reminded of David's words. David's words. And I think when he wrote these, he must have been standing watching what I'm watching. Looking at the sky, watching the clouds, watching and listening to the roar of the waves as they come steadily without pause upon the beach. Your love, O Lord, reaches to the heavens. Your faithfulness stretches to the sky. Your righteousness is like the mighty mountains. Your justice flows like the ocean's tide. And I would tell you one thing I've realized as I sit there and I stand watching those waves roll in, is that one, the depths of the sea are unfathomable to us, and we do not understand the depths of the sea, nor do we understand God's justice. But I also understand that those waves come in consistently. They never miss a beat. They continue. Sometimes they're large and sometimes they're small. But His justice never fails. Unfathomable like the depths of the ocean. Consistent like its waves. And He says, may the Lord judge between us. Perhaps the Lord will punish you for what you are doing, but I will not harm you. Folks, here's a sure thing. Here's a sure thing. Someone has offended you, right? I mean, you've been offended. You have been hurt by someone you never expected to hurt you. You have placed trust and you have been betrayed by a friend. Someone who should have always been there for you. Maybe your parents abandoned you at some place in your life. And someone that you pledged your life to and exchanged vows and exchanged the ring and expected it would always last forever. That person has been unfaithful to you once or many times. You've been lied about, or maybe there's been abuse in your life. You have chapters of fear, chapters of chase. And what you are doing with that now is what you will do with it, or it determines what you will do with that when you get your cave opportunity. That's a sure thing. But here's a sure promise. You will get your cave opportunity, folks. The most subtle temptation will come to you at some point in time, and your cave may be a coffee cafe when you have a chance just to throw a little verbal spear yourself. You'll have an opportunity through a staff memo to let everybody know what this one person they threw you under the bus. They weren't there when you needed them to be there. It will happen. Your cave opportunity will happen, if it hasn't already, in a lawyer's office. And you'll have a chance to retaliate, to get back at them, to make them hurt and to make them hurt for a long time. Or it might even happen for you. Your perfect gift-wrapped cave opportunity might happen for you even in the bedroom. All kinds of passive retaliation goes on in the bedroom. Folks, the outpouring of vengeance flows from the storing of resentment in our lives. And the effects of resentment in your life and in my life is it slowly strangles your trust and my trust of God, our ability to trust Him and allow Him to be who He is and allow His plan to take place. And it strangles over time our ability to love others, not just the person who has offended us, but those others around us. And folks, we do not know, I promise you, that you and I do not know how tightly we hold on to the resentment in our hearts until we are able to hold the opportunity of the knife of vengeance in our hand. Then we find out what resentments are stored in our life. Now, some of us are throw-uppers. Some of us, man, we have that opportunity, man. I mean, we're just right there, the knife's high. I mean, we're verbal about it. We're going to attack. We're full active mode with our retaliation. And some of us are peace lovers. And I don't know how many times that I've heard, oh, Steve, I processed it already. But we really haven't processed it. We really haven't worked through it. We've just pushed it down, us peace lovers. But it'll come again. It'll come again in some kind of a passive type retaliation. Folks, David has done the daily work. David, as he writes the Psalms, he says over and over, God, examine me. see if there's something in my heart. He has said, God, whatever these offenses I might be holding on to, please show them to me. I don't even see them, I know, and take them. He has that repeatedly in the songs that he writes. Examine my heart, God. Allow me to see what I cannot see. And I would say to you folks, just as a take-home today, as a couple take-homes, that you would make a decision to examine your conscience diet. Examine your conscience diet. Don't trust it. Examine it. What are you feeding it? When I had my heart attack 5 years ago, one of the medical staff came in, a dietitian, and said, Mr. Moss, if you don't want this to happen again, you're going to have to change your diet. My intake, what I put in my body. And for retaliation and vengeance not to be stored up resentment in our heart, then we must change our conscience diet. And so we have to watch the movies that we're watching. Because so many movies, man, are based on retaliation and vengeance, right? Some of the best movies are based on vengeance and retaliation. And we have to be careful of our media, the social media that we're involved in, what's going on there. And are there people clapping in the cave for others or for us? Are they encouraging that vengeance behavior? We have to be careful of the people that are around us. Are they speaking truth to us? Encouraging us to do something that God would have us do or not? I'm reminded of Romans 12, that Paul would write to the church at Rome, who was under incredible, intense persecutions. Dear friends, never take revenge. Never take revenge. Leave that to the righteous anger of God. For the scriptures say, I will take revenge. I will pay them back, says the Lord. Instead, this is his word to followers of Jesus. If your enemies are hungry, feed them. If your enemy is thirsty, give them something to drink. And in doing this, Paul says, you will heap burning coals of shame on their heads. Folks, we must examine our conscience and make intentional decisions to feed it truth. And we have to deal with the resentment and the offenses daily. And that means looking at God face to face in the eye and go, show me what I do not see. It's called keeping a short list, as opposed to letting your list of resentments getting long. Doing that on a regular basis. And folks, I would tell you, man, our Celebrate Recovery ministry here meets on Thursday night. I don't know any better process. They show you that allow the resentments, those things that are driving your behavior, that are filling your heart. They show you what those things are, and then they give you the help to get rid of them and get the freedom that God wants you to have. It happened in my life. I would love for it to happen in yours. Folks, vengeance, man, vengeance is natural. It's a lot of things, but it is natural. I mean, it's just, we are just depraved human beings, and when someone strikes against us, man, our position is just to strike back, verbally or whatever it is, or we might wait a few seconds or a few days, but we're looking for that opportunity. It is natural. It is natural in the world, and so that pressure for us is always going to be there. But we are given this great opportunities as followers of Jesus because it is so natural and the world has so bought into it and it's so encouraging it that when we restrain ourselves, as David did in the cave, when we restrain ourselves, it creates a curiosity. People are like, well, you had a chance to plunge the knife and you didn't plunge the knife. What is going on? And the opportunity is there for us to talk about the transformation that has happened in our life and that we serve a God who promises justice. And that's an opportunity to open the door for them to hear about Jesus in our life. They are drawn by that light. They are curious because of our character. Gives them a chance, or gives us a chance to help them find Jesus in a way they may never have encountered him before, and to draw them into this body of believers even, where we exist to help people find Jesus and to help people follow Jesus. And those opportunities not taken, that subtle temptation not taken, opens great opportunities for us to show people Jesus and the transformation he has done in your and my lives. You know, that's ironic here is that as we talk about God's justice and vengeance, that we want vengeance for them, but we don't necessarily want God's vengeance for us, right? We want mercy, right? And the truth of the fact is that our ledger of offenses against God is full. 6 pages, 7 pages, 8,000, 8 million, on and on and on. And God is a God of justice. God has to have justice. And I was reminded this morning that he says of Israel, I did not do these things because you deserve them. And that is true of us. But he has to have justice. And as a result of his need for justice, he made an ultimate sacrifice by sending his son, Jesus, to the cross, not only to remove us from the guilt of sin by his blood, but to pay as an atonement for the debt that we have, the offenses that we have against a holy God. Nothing you and I can do about that. No amount of church going, no amount of community service, no amount of being the right kind of person or the right kind of parent or the right kind of employee, none of that will wipe that slate clean. Only the sinless blood of Jesus Christ, given as an atonement of justice for my sin and your sin. And so we get his mercy, but justice is paid. And that's the gospel. And that's good news. And so we can sing about his love, and we can sing about his faithfulness, and we can sing about his righteousness, and we can sing about his justice, and we can give him praise for all these things. We started this sermon with a song. Today I want to send you home with a song in your hearts of God's beautiful love, his powerful justice in his life, and what he did so that we could receive mercy.